All right, I am excited to be sharing one of my favorite resources today. It is a website called Data Nuggets. You can find it at datanuggets.org. And so these are great for finding phenomena that you can use both in instruction or for assessments, and also for finding data that you can use with students. I know for some topics, it is really hard to find good solid data sets that are also cleaned up in a format that you can use them with your students. And so this is a great place to go for that. So before I get too far, I just want to come down to this box right here where it has all of the data nuggets and the tags that they've tagged them with. And so just looking at these topics, you can probably see that most of these align well with our earth science and our life science standards. So these are really great for middle school teachers and then for high school earth and space science and biology teachers. There are a couple that have been tagged with physics, but you can see how tiny it is. And the physics ones, I think, will be actually a little bit harder to integrate well into our standards. There are a couple that might work. And then there are a couple of chemistry ones that I think will align well with our standards that you could find a place to put them. But overwhelmingly, these are things that we're going to see in earth and space science, or we're going to see in our life science standards. So chemistry and physics teachers, sorry, there's probably not as much here for you. So there are tons of resources on this site. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to show you one example of a data nugget. They're all set up pretty much the same way. So in this table, you can see the tags, the summaries. So this is usually where I like to search because it has a short description of each one. It also has a reading level, which there are some of these that even though they were at a reading level that my students were supposed to be at, I still had to make revisions and maybe use some discussions and some pictures to make sure that my students understood how the investigation was set up before we got to the data piece. So those reading levels are there as a guide, but just know you may have to make some revisions or use some reading strategies depending on your students. So for each of these, when you open it up, you'll see the reading that is given to students. So you can read through it and decide if this is even something you want to look at. And then there is a teacher guide. They pulled these off the website a while back because students were accessing them. But if you email them, they will send them to you. So if you find one you want to use and you want the teacher guide that has some additional resources, click on the teacher guide, fill out the form. They're usually pretty quick to get back to you. And then each of these comes with a grading rubric. The grading rubric is generic. I would use it as a starting place and maybe pull some of the pieces that you're going to be focusing on instead of looking at every single piece every single time you use one of these. And then there are always 3 different graph types. I think graph type A and graph type C are the most useful. So for graph type A, it has our background reading. So these are the same for all of the graph types, the background reading, and then the data set. And then for graph type A, it gives students the graph. So for whatever reason, if we are not worried about having them actually create the graph, pull graph type A, and then they have the graphs, they can use it for analysis. And then graph type C is same thing where they have the reading and the data at the beginning, which is the same, but then they just have a blank space. So if you're working on actually having students figure out how to best represent the data, how are we going to organize this and graph this so that it tells us the story that we're looking for, use graph type C. Graph type B is a hybrid where the students are graphing, but they've been given the axes, and I think that's a little bit less useful than type A or type C. But if anybody has a good idea for how you would use this, I'd love to hear about it. So those are data nuggets. If you end up using any of these in your class, either for instruction or maybe on an assessment, I would love to hear which ones you end up using, which standards you end up using them with. And then also, I'd love to hear about any modifications or how you kind of reinvent these for use in your own classroom.